Yistalem!
It was also common practice for the victims to be offered something to quench their thirst or dull the pain. The Gospels say a soldier gave Jesus a sponge soaked in vinegar. Perhaps that's why he was able to stay alive for 6 hours. But Jesus was not immune to human emotions. In his final hour, say the Gospels, he cried out to God.
My God, why have you forsaken me? It seems that he's a little bit frustrated. Where the hell are you now, God, when I need you? I think he's simply in a dialogue with God as he always has been. God, where are you now?
Biblical scripture is very clear he did not die. I mean, it's clearly written in the New Testament, if you follow it carefully from the Gospel of Matthew and other Gospels, he survived that cross.
As a former Christian, I believe that God had put his son on the cross. And I used to think, what type of father would kill his son just for the sake of someone else's sins? You know, he was taken down from the cross after only 3 hours on the cross. Normally, from when you research on crucifixion, a very fit young man like Jesus was at the time, I think he was stay on the cross for a number of days. But because that day was the Sabbath day, he had to be taken down the cross before the sunset.
Medically speaking, he wouldn't have died on the cross in 3 to 4 hours, because in the olden days they used to put these criminals on the cross for even few days, at least 24 to 48 hours. Secondly, they used to break their bones. You know, the two robbers on his side, their bones were broken, but Jesus Christ's bones were not broken.
When the soldier, pierced his side with his spear, out gushed the water, the blood, which normally you don't get off a dead body.
Then the Jewish authorities asked Pilate to allow them to break the legs of the men who had been crucified and to take the bodies down from the crosses. They requested this because it was Friday, and they did not want the bodies to stay on the crosses on the Sabbath, since the coming Sabbath was especially holy. So the soldiers went and broke the legs of the first man, and then of the other man who had been crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. One of the soldiers, however, plunged his spear into Jesus' side. At once, blood and water poured out.
It is medically proven that if a person is dead, his blood clots and it doesn't remain liquid or fluid. So if he was dead, the blood...
Jewish law states that a body must be buried within 24 hours of death, but not on the Sabbath, which runs from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset.
The earliest record is the Gospel of Mark. What Mark says, and it's also repeated by Luke and by John, is quite interesting. That Joseph took the body down, and then it says because of the emergency situation that the holiday, that the Passover is so near, hours away on that Friday afternoon, that he put the body in a tomb near the place of the crucifixion.
He was taken down, his legs weren't broken like his other two people who were crucified with him. And he was taken into a cave. He was administered to by a doctor, Nicodemus. He was a physician who anointed his wounds, the whip marks on his back and the crucifixion wounds, and the wounds on his head from the thorns.
There should be no room in a rational world for the apparition stories reported in the Gospels. Yet science cannot explain them away convincingly. For the time being, they must remain a matter of faith. But the Gospels do offer some other evidence. They say that some women came to visit the tomb 3 days after his death. They found the tomb empty and fled terrified. Since then, people have tried to find a rational explanation for the empty tomb.
Like a lot of people, I was raised Christian. But by the time I was only 6 years old, I'd already begun to grow cynical. I remember being in Sister Mary Majola's first grade classroom being taught things about Jesus that I just couldn't accept as being true. And ever since then, I've spent my whole life seeking the truth. Who was Jesus, and what was he really teaching? But what is most shocking of all is that Jesus survived the crucifixion and moved back to India, where he lived until the age of 115 and is buried at the Rosabal Shrine in Srinagar, Kashmir. Now, I know this is hard to believe for a lot of people, but belief systems are psychic penitentiaries for our minds. And if we're going to evolve as a species, we need to move beyond belief. This is the Rosabal Shrine in Srinagar, Kashmir, the final resting place of Yus Asaf, otherwise known as Isa, Yeshua, Yesu, and Jesus. We'll cover much of the significant evidence suggesting that this is, in fact, the real tomb of Jesus later in this film. But just to give you a tantalizing glimpse of things to come, take a look at these footprints that were also discovered at the Rosabal Shrine. In these footprints, you can clearly see for yourself that they have markings on them the exact same places that nails would have gone had they been pierced through someone who had been crucified. And they match identically the patterning on the Shroud of Turin, the wounds of someone who had a nail driven through their feet, left foot over right.
Some claim that if Jesus did survive the crucifixion, his first priority would be to escape from the clutches of the Romans.
Jesus, I think, would have to leave the territory. And we have to ask the question, where would he go? And you just look at a map. Palestine is on the far eastern border of the Roman Empire. If you go west, you're going right into the heart of Roman territory, where we have our 15 legions stationed around the world. If you go east, you're crossing over into Parthia, and you're going towards Persia eventually, and India and Afghanistan, that direction.
And there's another reason why Jesus might have been tempted to go east.
But rather he had survived the crucifixion and completed his divine mission of preaching to the lost tribes of the house of Israel.
The people here in Kashmir call their tribe Ben-e Israel and claim to be descendants of the lost tribes. And this, they say, is Yus Asaf's tomb. The first building erected around this site was built in 112 AD. In fact, it's now a shared gravesite, In the 15th century, the Islamic holy man Syed Nazir ud-Din was also buried here. Although both gravestones under the cloth point north-south in the Islamic tradition, the body of Yusuf is buried beneath in a grave dug east-west in the Jewish tradition. Next to the sarcophagus are 2 carved footprints. The marks on these are said to be the symbolic representations of the scars of crucifixion.
The
footprints were carved as a sign. The scars are clearly visible, received when he was nailed to the cross. They show that this is the same person who came from Israel and that he lived and died here. You won't find any footprints like these anywhere else in Kashmir. We don't have that tradition. The position of the scars, just behind the toes, do not match each other, but they would align if a single nail was driven through both feet, with the left foot placed over the right. There are many who believe this tomb to be the tomb of Jesus. If this is the tomb of Jesus, then he spent most of his life in the mountain kingdom of Kashmir. He did not die on the cross. There was no resurrection. He did not ascend into heaven, and he does not sit at the right hand of God. For many Christians, this would be the end of Christianity as we know it.
As you begin to sift through the information in this presentation and do your own research, ask yourself which version of events makes more sense. The orthodox view presented in the Bible, or the alternative explanation of events provided here. One thing is very clear. A very famous holy man was buried in this shrine 1900 years ago. A man so highly regarded that kings honored him, and that the shrine built for him survived to this day. You be the judge. Examine all of the evidence and the case presented here to you and ask yourself, could this be true?